Okay, so we'll make a start then. So thank you everybody for joining us for our IBMS Support Hub in June. Delighted to be joined as always by Tahmina for these sessions and by 4 of her students from the University of Salford who are currently on placement. So they're going to be able to give you a really good insight into what going on to placement is like and what the experience of being on placement is like as well. So thank you so much for making time to join us. It's great to have so many of you here. We've got over 100 people join us, which is fantastic. So just a little bit about the people, as I say, who are presenting and what the session is going to be about today. So if we move on to the next slide, this is just an overview of what we're going to cover in the next hour. So it is quite packed. There's quite a lot of information, but the video will be available within a couple of weeks of the session, and it will be open access on the IBMS website. So it'll be nice and easy to find. So if you do miss anything or you want to just do a recap, you can always go back to the video and have a look through again. So what we're going to cover in the session today is why taking a placement during your degree is so important, and how that can help you with your career afterwards. We're going to talk about getting ready to go on placement. So we'll talk about agreements with the workplace before you go out. Once you get onto placement, what you might expect, things that the workplace will do for you, and that interaction between the workplace and between your university. So when you first start at your workplace, there should be an induction process. They'll go through their local policies on things like health and safety, behaviour at work, annual leave, those kind of things. And then there should be a very clear agreement before you go on your placement and while you're there about who is going to do what the expectations are of you as a student on placement, your university, and the people who are looking after you and training you in the workplace lab as well. Anything around assessments, what to expect when you're doing your placement. Your university might have an assessment for a module linked to the placement, or it may just be the assessment of the registration training portfolio. So you should be clear about that before you go on placement about what the expectations are for you for assessment. What support and advice is available to you, both from your university and also from the workplace. And then we'll talk about the IBMS registration training portfolio, why it's important, what it involves, and the assessment of that, which is called the verification. We're going to hear from 4 students who are all brilliant and talented and really enthusiastic, which is brilliant. So they will be talking to you about their own personal experiences of being on placement. And then we'll talk a little bit at the end about IBMS membership as well. So if we go on to the next slide, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the reasons why placements are important before we get into a bit more detail. So if you want to register with the HCPC as a biomedical scientist to practice in the UK, you need to do 2 things. You need to meet the HCPC standards of education and training, and you need to meet their standards of proficiency. The education and training standards are met through the degree programme that you're studying. So hopefully people on the call will be from IBMS accredited degree programmes, because that's the simplest and quickest way to become registered with the HCPC. So you need to be doing an IBMS accredited degree programme, or if you're not, you need to then look at what you will need to do to fulfil those education requirements afterwards and have your degree assessed by the institute. And then we can tell you which bits of the theoretical knowledge, understanding and practical skills you still need to gain. The standards of proficiency are what you will do in the workplace on a placement, and you will then be working through the IBMS registration training portfolio, which will demonstrate how you can evidence that you are competent in the lab and how you can demonstrate that you can do those standards and you are proficient in all aspects of being a biomedical scientist. Next slide, Tahmina. Okay, so when you are doing the registration training portfolio, as I said, you need to have an IBMS accredited biomedical science degree. So that's what you should be studying. And you need to undertake the clinical laboratory training. So normally that's through a placement year. If you don't have the opportunity to do a placement, you can do the training afterwards, but you would need to look for a trainee position, which is quite difficult to find, or maybe go in as a support worker and you could wait for an opportunity to train. So taking a placement is the quickest, simplest and easiest way in order to complete both the standards of education and training and the standards of proficiency. When you have both of those things, then you can apply for your certificate of competence from the IBMS. And once you have your certificate of competence from us, then you can formally apply to the HCPC, the Health and Care Professions Council, to become a biomedical scientist. Okay, I think that's over to you, Tahmina.
Thank you, Sue. Okay, so many of you who have joined this session today, hopefully you have already secured a placement to start for the next academic year. So you will be familiar with some of the kind of contracts that are coming through, the paperwork that you're having to complete, and that paperwork includes what we call a pre-placement agreement. For those of you who haven't secured a placement, that's fine, but this is kind of an overview of what to expect when you do come to applying for a placement and when you secure a placement. So the contract will include a pre-placement agreement, and that usually includes what we call a DBS check. So this check is to check that you don't have any criminal convictions, that kind of thing, and that you are safe to work in the workplace environment. The pre-placement agreement also includes vaccinations that you will have to take before you start your placement. Again, that will either go through the labs, the trust's occupational health department, or the university will organise the vaccination for you. So again, make sure you find out exactly who is organising that. The university that I work at, Salford, we usually organise vaccinations for the students. And then, of course, you need to agree a start date amongst yourselves. So at our university, placements usually start from September and they last up to 12 months. So the student will go away on placement from September and then come back to university again the following September. So make sure you agree a start date. If you've got any pre-booked holidays, you might want to communicate that as well before the placement starts as well. Other pre-placement agreement type paperwork will include things like expenses, so whether there's any bursaries involved, whether the trust is providing you with a bursary. Some universities can provide bursaries as well for students. It's definitely worth checking. You might want to check on financial arrangements as well. If the trust isn't providing a bursary, look into if you're already working, you've got a part-time job, whether you can afford to keep that job, because again, the placement is quite a full-on commitment. It's more or less like a full-time job, so you might need to look at that. Check things like holiday allowance, sick leave, that kind of thing is also included in a pre-placement agreement. So make sure you're reading all of the documents before you sign, and ask any questions as well, either to your placement tutor at the university or the training manager at the trust that you'll be doing your placement in. So you will have an induction when you start, usually in the first week of your placement. So the first day is usually a meeting with your training manager, and they will go through lots of different policies. So it is quite overwhelming the first day and the first week. There's a lot of information. You'll be introduced to the team, and you'll be provided with an overview of the organisation itself, how the team kind of works, how the different labs work together. Different policies. So I mentioned earlier things like annual leave, that kind of thing. Your training manager will also talk through your role as a student, what you can expect from the training manager and the team, and what they can expect from you as a student. They'll also talk to you about the different processes during the placement and how you need to make sure you're complying with them. These kind of things will include training, most likely, so statutory and mandatory training, things like health and safety. You'll have e-learning modules to complete, and once you've completed them, hopefully you can start your training in the labs. Your physical training usually starts off on specimen reception or within the lab itself. They'll also talk to you a little bit maybe about the portfolio and how you will be supported to complete the portfolio, how often you'll be meeting with them, and how feedback will be provided to you once evidence for the portfolio has been reviewed. So as I said, your induction process is usually carried out by the training officer or the training manager or the departmental manager and HR. And what this usually includes is an introduction to the colleagues that you'll be working with and the department that you'll be working in. You should also be provided with a tour of the lab and the trust itself. So usually you'll walk around the lab, get to meet the different people working in the lab, the different sections, and then hopefully whoever is doing the induction with you, they'll take you through to visit the other areas of the trust. So the canteen, the library, any quiet rooms, prayer rooms, and that kind of thing. You'll also be taken to the security department to collect your ID badge. You'll be set up with an IT account and an email account. As I mentioned earlier, you'll also be provided with an overview of your role, expectations, and that kind of thing, and then any statutory and mandatory training that you need to complete. So this isn't the training that you complete in the lab to demonstrate your competencies or your portfolio training. It's more your statutory and mandatory training that includes things like health and safety, quality, training and competence, and that kind of thing. You'll also be provided information on absence. So there will be a policy on how, if you are going to be absent from work due to sickness or anything like that, what the policy is when it comes to reporting an absence. And again, I'll talk to you a little bit more about that in slides later on. And you will also be given information on how much annual leave you'll be provided. So different trusts have different annual leave entitlements, so make sure you find out what it is for you. If you're working in a trust different to one of your friends, for example, or another student, they might have more or less annual leave days than you do. So make sure you check that. And there will also be a formal way of requesting annual leave as well in advance. And again, I'll talk to you a little bit more about that later on. Health and safety will include things like knowing where emergency exits are in case there's a fire, evacuation procedures, first aid facilities. You'll be provided with a health and safety policy that you do need to read, and then you'll be asked to sign that. Again, trusts will have different versions of the way that they provide a policy. Some will have an electronic version, so you'll be provided with a login to read an electronic version of the health and safety policy, or some labs have a hard copy which you'll be provided with, so you read that and then you sign it at the end, and then the health and safety officer can store that away and provide that as evidence that you have read the policy. You'll also be provided with information on how to report an accident and what happens should you witness or be involved in an accident. So I'll move on to the kind of working hours. Usually for a lot of labs, they're open 24 hours, but the core hours for placement students are usually between 8:30 to 5. Some labs might have differing hours that can be 8 to 4, for example. Again, it just depends on the different trusts and how they work, but those are usually the core hours, which can vary depending on the lab. You'll also be provided, hopefully during the induction, on break times. Usually staff are provided with a short break in the morning, an afternoon break, and then a lunch break as well. The breaks are usually split up between the team, so it's always to ensure there's always staff members in the lab. So the way that that lab I used to work in, the breaks were in the morning, a 20-minute break between 10 and 11. And that would vary for staff members within the lab. So you could either go on an early break between 10 to 10:20, or you could go on a late break from 10:40 to 11. And that's just to make sure that there's always a team available in the lab when other people are going on the break. For your lunch break, it's usually between 12 to 1 or 1 to 2. And then in the afternoon, there's a break between 3 to 4. And again, if you're on an early break, you'll go at 3, or if you're on a late break, you'll go at 3:40. So it is split up to make sure there's always colleagues to cover the lab. Now, it's really important that when you do leave for a break, that you come back on time. Remember that if you are on an early break, and if you take longer than you should be, there are other colleagues that are waiting to go on break as well. So make sure you're being professional, and if you are expecting to come back a little bit later, maybe you've got something planned for your break time to take a call or something. If you are expecting something like that, make sure you let your senior know or your colleagues know. So just clear communication, really. Also, when you are arranging the break times, try and be flexible. If there is a break time that you definitely need to go on, so it might be that you need to pop home, for example, for a delivery, or you're expecting an important call, either at 12 or 1, make sure you communicate that with your colleagues, and be flexible where needed. So annual leave, again, each trust will have their own local policy. Usually the annual leave for placement students is the same as what an employee receives. So if an employee receives 25 days, then they will provide the same for a placement student. Some trusts can provide 30 days, 32 days. Again, it just depends on the lab that you're working in. Again, the annual leave policy states that you do need to book annual leave in advance, and you need to agree that with your training officer or your supervisor in advance. This is really important because training leads will eventually start putting your name down on a rota. So once you've been trained and you signed off as competent, you do become a member of the team. So they will create a rota a week in advance or a couple of weeks in advance, and your name is down for a specific section. So if you are booking leave, they need to make sure they're facilitating that and actually reflecting that on the rota, so that your name isn't put down on a section when you are due to be on holiday, for example. So usually your placement lasts between 9 to 12 months, and this is what we usually recommend for you to provide sufficient time to complete your training and your portfolio. So again, something that you might want to bear in mind is, because it's a 9 to 12 month placement, if you're not taking annual leave during the year, a lot of students tend to take annual leave over the summer. It just gives them a bit of a break before they come back to university for the final year of the study. But if you are absent quite a bit during the placement, then you might need to make up the hours. And again, that just depends on the university that you're studying in, or the trust that you work for. So some universities actually stipulate the number of hours that you need to have spent in the lab. And some labs also say that if you've already had a number of absences due to sickness, or you've taken more than your annual leave entitlement, then they do expect you to come back in to make up those hours. So again, definitely worth checking with your training manager when you start your placement, so you know exactly what to expect. Now, although it is more or less like a full-time job on placement, usually you are allocated a half-a-day study leave. Some trusts do give additional time based on workload and staffing, but we do usually recommend no more than 1 day a week, and that is just because you do need that time to help you get trained within the labs and collect your evidences for your portfolio. So again, this differs varying, and it varies on the lab that you work in. So some training officers ask you to stay on site during your study leave, and you can use a quiet office near the lab, or they ask you to use the library at the trust to do your work. Again, it differs between the different trusts. Other training managers allow their students to go home and work from home during their study leave. But the purpose of the study leave is to give you that time to gather and write up your evidence. So do make sure that you are utilising that time and making sure, you know, that time is productive. Moving on to sickness, obviously there are times when we get poorly and we can't attend work because we're too sick. So make sure that you phone in the lab at the start of the day. This is so that if you are placed on the rota in a specific section, your training manager or your colleagues are aware that you're not coming in, and they can try and pull in staff from other sections to help cover the rota. Again, each trust will all have their own local sickness policy, and the rules can be different. Again, some labs will treat the trainees the same as the employees. So it's the same rules for everyone, regardless of whether you're a student or you're employed by the trust. And usually the policy states that you have to ring in every day, that you're unable to attend work unless you have a fit note. So if you've got a fit note, then you don't need to ring in every day. But if you don't have a fit note, then you will need to ring in each morning. Again, some trusts don't require a fit note if you've been off with sickness over 7 days, but some trusts do say that if an employee is expected to provide a fit note because they've been sick for more than 7 days, then students are expected to do that as well. Really important, again, maintain professionalism. Don't send a text, an email, or a message, or even post something on social media to say you're ill and that you're not coming in to work. Remember, it's a professional setting and they're relying on you as a team member, so you do have to ring in the morning, and don't just send a text. Some colleagues might not even carry the phone on them when they're working in the lab, which they shouldn't. And again, I'll talk to you a bit more about that later on. But you do need to ring in and speak to someone to make sure someone has got that message that you're not coming into work. Again, this is very different depending on the lab that you're working in. Some labs will do a return to work meeting, which is a formal process where the training manager will sit down with you and just discuss, you know, the reason for sickness. And this is purely to support you, really. If there's any reason that is preventing you from coming into work, how can they support you and put measures in place in the workplace to help you complete your placement, really. So it's purely a supportive mechanism. Some trusts don't require that for placement students. They might not do a return to work meeting, and they might just log your attendance on the attendance sheet, but not actually have a formal process of a return to work. So again, just depends on the lab that you're working in. I mentioned earlier about statutory and mandatory training. So these things are compulsory. You have to complete all of these during your induction process. So health and safety, equality, diversity and inclusion, GDPR to make sure you're aware of the data protection rules. Things on confidentiality are really important when you're working in a healthcare setting. Again, I mentioned fire safety earlier, moving and handling, infection prevention and control, safeguarding and preventing radicalisation. So these are the most common types of modules that you'll need to complete as part of your statutory and mandatory training. So some of your kind of role-specific information, usually you should be provided a clear outline of your role as a trainee biomedical scientist. Now, usually this follows the format or a job description of a medical laboratory assistant or an associate practitioner. But obviously there'll be some additional training and competency assessments required for you as a trainee biomedical scientist, and that's to help you gather evidence for your portfolio, make sure you're being signed off for the knowledge and competency criteria. You should also be provided with a training programme at the start of your placement, which gives you information on your rotations, so which specific sections you'll be trained in and how often you'll be rotated around and how much time you'll spend in each of those departments or sections. You should also be provided with a training log. Now, this is a formal document which you're provided with, and when you're being trained in a section, the person who's training you will sign that document to say they've trained you on a particular task. They will note down their name, the signature and the date that they trained you, and then you will also need to sign that document to provide evidence that you've basically been trained for a particular task. You'll also be provided with a competency assessment, and again, your trainer or whoever's observed you completing a task will sign that document. They'll put a date on it, and then you also need to sign that document. So this is just an example of a competency assessment or a training log. You'll be provided with something similar to this. So you can see here it says reception duties. So you'll be provided with the standard operating procedure, so SOP, which you all should be familiar with. And then you'll be kind of observed in each of these tasks. So you'll be asked to kind of go through sample acceptance, so demonstrate on specimen reception that you know what the specimen acceptance criteria is. Someone will observe you, debag the samples and just check that the samples match with the request forms and that it's the correct patient, that you know how to deal with leaking specimens, you know how to disinfect the workbench, for example. So people in the lab will trainers or senior colleagues will observe you completing each of these tasks, and then they'll sign you off as you go along, and you'll also sign that, and then they will put in comments whether they've actually observed you or whether they've asked you questions and whether you provided evidence to show that you meet each of these, you know, that you're competent in each of these areas. These kind of documents are really useful for providing evidence for your portfolio as well. So if you haven't been provided a training log or a competency assessment within the first couple of weeks or month of your placement, make sure you do follow that up with your training manager, because really you shouldn't be working in a section unsupervised or without being signed off as competent or trained without this document. So it's really important that you follow that up with your training manager. So what happens when you're on a placement? These are the skills that you will develop: team working skills, communication skills. So team working will involve with, you know, working with different members of the team, so MLAs, associate practitioners, senior colleagues, biomedical scientists, but not just within the lab, but also teams outside of the lab. So there'll be nurses, clinicians, consultants, transfusion practitioners, lots of different types of roles that you'll be working with. Again, you'll be developing communication skills. So remember that everyone's different. Everyone will communicate in their own style. So again, you'll learn to adapt your communication skills. Interpersonal skills. So again, I mentioned that everyone's different and communicates in different ways, but also you'll have lots of different colleagues, have different behaviours. So you'll learn how to work with lots of different types of behaviours and attitudes. But also, really importantly, your time management skills. You are working in more or less a full-time role as a trainee biomedical scientist. You might also be juggling a part-time role, and even if you're not, you've still got the portfolio, and you might have assessments that you're doing as part of your placement module from university. So not just the academic side of the time management, but also within the lab. Lots of samples are coming in, you've got turnaround times to meet, you've got patients who are waiting for their results so they can be treated. So you will be working under pressure, and you'll learn how to be prioritising lots of different types of tasks. So again, all of these skills really important for your development, and again helps towards your employability as well at the end of your placement and once you've graduated and applying for jobs. So I mentioned that you'll be working with lots of different colleagues from different departments. Departments will include outpatients, clinics, theatres and wards, lots of these different types of roles, which I won't read through because I've already mentioned them. But again, it's really important to learn how to communicate with all the different types of teams. It's a multidisciplinary team when you're working in the lab. It's quite easy to forget that when you're in the lab working either as a trainee biomedical scientist or qualified, that because we're not patient facing, we do sometimes tend to forget that we're working in the background, and it is just us, but actually the results we provide and the tests that we run feed into lots of different roles. So nurses will be relying on the results that we provide so they can go away and provide treatment. Doctors are waiting for the results that we've analysed and interpreted. So again, they can work out a treatment plan. So while you're working on your portfolio and you're being trained, you should hopefully have regular meetings with your training officer. Now, as a minimum, we say once or twice a month. You might have more regular meetings at the beginning, just while you're settling in, and then they will drop to the minimum of once a month. During these meetings, your training officer will provide feedback on your evidence in the portfolio. So usually you'll be submitting evidence for your portfolio more than once a month. You will be provided with a portfolio on a digital platform called OneFile, so you can submit your evidence on OneFile electronically. Your training officer will review that evidence and then meet with you regularly to provide feedback on the evidence. If there's any amendments that you need to make, they'll send that back to you, and you kind of need to be updating that as you go along. They'll check your progress in training. So if you've been provided if you've been placed in a section to complete your training for 4 weeks, for example, after 4 weeks, they'll check where you're up to and whether you've been signed off. And if not, how much longer you need to be spending in that department to be, signed off on that section. They'll also be providing you deadlines and targets to achieve before the next meeting. So it might be that they say that you've got to complete a certain number of tasks before the next meeting, so they can rotate you into a different department, or it can be targets for your portfolio as well. So it might be that they say we want 3 pieces of evidence for the next month, and then you submit that, and then they will check that you've achieved that, and then they'll then send you targets for the next month. So those meetings are a useful checking point, and also really useful for highlighting things as well. You can mention things that have gone really well, but also make sure you are communicating with your training manager if there are any problems. Just because you need that support, don't struggle on your own. That's what they're there for, to help you succeed in your placement. You will also have regular meetings with your university placement tutor. Now, your placement tutor will arrange these meetings in advance with your training manager while you're on placement to check that you are available on that particular day and that your training officer's there as well. These meetings are usually just to check in, make sure that you've settled in well, that everything's going fine. The meetings are also really useful to provide you any updates from university as well. So if there's been any changes to the programme team or, just general kind of updates from the university. And they'll also check the progress of your training. So if you are in a particular department, and hopefully the placement tutor will have observer access to your portfolio to check where you're up to with your training and whether you're actually having your training logs and competency assessments signed off. Now, copies of these training logs and competency assessments can be requested from your training manager or from the placement student, and this is purely for audit processes, just to check that the training department or the lab are actually signing you off as you're going along. And the meetings are also there to help provide support for both parties. So it isn't just for the placement student, but also for the placement provider in case of any issues. So it's kind of someone, the tutor is there to facilitate support for both the student and the training manager. So what are the expectations of the placement student? So students are usually treated as an employee and they are part of the team. You are expected to behave in a professional manner. Remember, you're in a workplace setting and you're working with colleagues, so it's important to be professional. This feeds into things like punctuality. If you are going to be late, you're stuck in traffic, obviously, we can't control these things. Make sure you phone the lab and let them know. So any colleagues that are depending on you to complete a task that you're usually responsible for in the morning, they know that they need to ask someone else to cover that particular task because you're going to be late. Again, you are part of the team, and that's great. And you do end up wanting to know your colleagues a bit better, and that can involve chatting, but too much chatting can involve distractions as well. And obviously, if you're distracted, that can then lead to making mistakes. So really important when you're in the lab that you do concentrate, especially in times of busy periods as well. Please don't use your mobile phone in the lab. You know this from university for health and safety purposes. You don't want to be spreading things or contaminating your phone. If you are expecting an urgent call, please let your senior know in the morning that you're expecting a call, just so they know that you might need to pop out to answer that call. We know that there are commitments outside of work, and sometimes you do need to take a call. So you just need to let someone know. It's clear communication. And also, lots of students ask about what to wear when they're on placement as well. Usually smart, casual. Don't wear flip-flops, open-toe shoes or anything like that. Fairly obvious, if it's a spillage or anything like that, you don't want to be getting that on your feet. So usually smart, casual is fine. So what can you expect from the placement provider? So your training manager and your colleagues, they should be providing you with learning opportunities. So that's the purpose of your placement, rotating around the different sections and the different departments to help, expose as much of the lab as possible to you so that you're learning and that you can see as much as you can while you're on the placement. You can expect to get suitable supervision and support from your training manager as well. And they should also define a set of tasks or any projects that allows you to develop your skills and knowledge. So I mentioned earlier that, you will be rotating through the different departments. So you can expect that once you've completed your training in one section to be moved on into another. Now, again, labs will work very differently to each other. Some labs might require you to spend maybe 4 to 6 weeks on specimen reception. Some will require you to spend a little bit longer just to give you that extra bit of time to really embed that knowledge of the processes in specimen reception. So everyone's different, but if you spent quite a bit of time and you feel like you're not moving on, or your training program doesn't say that you'll be moving on to a different section, you can go back to your training manager and just ask for a little bit more clarification on what's happening in the next couple of months. You can also expect training from your colleagues to help support you develop the competency and the knowledge and skills that you need for your portfolio. So usually at the start of a placement, you will be buddied up with someone or a few different people that will be training you. So if you haven't been allocated someone that you will be kind of shadowing at the beginning maybe, or someone who will observe you, then make sure you check that with your training manager and just ask, is there someone that can kind of be with you for the first few weeks while you're training? Again, just open and transparent communication. If you're not sure, make sure you just ask. A lot of the questions can be answered quite simply just by asking. Again, the placement provider needs to make sure that you're fully trained and competent before you can perform any tasks unsupervised. So there will be a period of training when you're kind of supervised with someone, but they need to be signing that training log. And if you were being left to work on a task unsupervised, then you do really need to mention to your colleagues that you shouldn't be performing that task unsupervised because you haven't been signed off as competent. So your training log and competency assessment are two different things. Training just shows that you've been shown or demonstrated how to do something, but your competency assessment shows that you know how to do something without being prompted. So someone will observe you perform a task without asking you, or they might ask you questions to find out why you're doing something. And they will tick you off to make sure you're completing the tasks as you should be. So once you've been signed off, you can actually complete that task unsupervised. So if they're asking you to do something and they're walking away and you haven't been signed off as competent, please make sure you're speaking to your colleague and just letting them know that you're not signed off as competent, and that you shouldn't be completing that task. Now, the reason for that is because if there was an error or an incident, the first thing the department will look at is your training log and competency assessment. And if you haven't been signed off, they'll ask you why you completed that task without being signed off. You will be reflecting on the work that you do, so there'll be reflections throughout your portfolio as well. And as well, when you meet with your training manager, you'll reflect on the kind of work that you've been doing over the past few weeks. And the training manager should also check that you've covered all the kind of statutory and mandatory training, which includes health and safety in the workplace, and that they're not asking you to do anything above your level of skill and experience. So anything outside of your scope of practice, they shouldn't be asking you to do. We understand that placements can be challenging, especially when students haven't had an experience of a full-time job previously, so it can be challenging. But your training officer and your placement tutor are there to support you, so please do reach out early. Don't struggle on your own. Lots of resources are in place to help provide you with support and guidance. If you do have any disabilities or need any reasonable adjustments, please make sure you're communicating with your training manager. That is purely to support you within your role. Any concerns or issues that you might have in the workplace, make sure you're raising them early. Speak to your training officer first, because they might be able to help you out without it escalating. Or if you feel like you can't speak to the training officer or training manager in the lab, make sure you reach out to your placement tutor. They will help to have those conversations if needed. And a meeting might be organised between the placement student, the training officer and the tutor if there are any serious concerns. If there are concerns that are related to the performance and professionalism of the student, then the placement tutor will help to write up an action plan with the training officer and with the agreement of the student as well. There'll be some targets that will be set so that everyone knows what to expect of each other. And if there is an action plan, again, this will be monitored by the placement tutor, so you might need additional meetings throughout a couple of months just to check that everything's fine and that the action plan is being followed and the targets are being achieved. Now, if say for example, there is poor performance or lack of professionalism, it might be that the placement needs to be terminated, so that might lead to withdrawal. So again, really important that you understand the consequences of not being professional. Now, some universities have assessments as part of the placement. Usually your placement tutor will provide information related to this at the beginning of your placement, so you know exactly what to expect throughout the year. And make sure you are checking your university emails regularly as well. Don't just completely switch off from checking your emails when you're on placement, because there might be lots of important information coming through that you miss. So the IBMS registration training portfolio has two sections. You have professional conduct and professional skills and standards. This particular screenshot is related to the old version, but don't worry too much about that, because when you are provided your portfolio on one file, you'll have the latest version on there. So hopefully most of you will know that you require 30 pieces of evidence that you will be collecting throughout your placement. These evidences will be submitted on one file, and your training officer will check those off and sign them whenever you've demonstrated that you've met the knowledge and competency criteria. It's really helpful to keep a reflective log or a diary during your placement. It helps you to kind of reflect when there have been incidences throughout your placement that you might want to reflect on. Now, that doesn't mean just incidents that are kind of involving errors or anything like that. It's also where you might have had a really good day, for example, where there's been maybe short staffing, but the team are pulled together and you know, you've achieved meeting the turnaround times, achieved processing the samples on time, that kind of thing. If you log that in your diary, not too many words, you can just put a sentence in a day. It's really good for CPD, but also when you come up to writing up a reflection, you can refer back to that diary. You've got a date in there and you've got some prompts to remind you of what happened. So it's good practice. I remember keeping a diary myself when I did my placement, and I've still got that, and I do look back at it. You know, it's a nice memory to have. Now, at the end of your placement, you'll have a verification process. So this is when your portfolio is completed. Your training officer will contact the IBMS or the university. Again, every university will do things a little bit different. Some universities require the training officer to contact IBMS directly for a verifier, and some universities will already have their own pool of verifiers. So once a verifier has been allocated, the training officer will agree a date and time with the verifier that's convenient for everyone for the verification to take place. The portfolio will be reviewed by the verifier. They will check that you've provided all the evidence that you need to demonstrate that you've met the HCPC standards of proficiency. You'll be asked to give a tour of the lab, and the verifier will also ask you questions during that tour. You should be able to answer these questions. They can vary from health and safety to the different types of specimens that you process, confidentiality, policies, quality. It can vary. So you should be able to answer those questions at the end of your placement. If your verification is successful, the verifier will complete a report and then send it back to the IBMS to say that you're successful. And then once you've graduated with your degree and you've completed that verification, you will receive a certificate of competence from the IBMS, and then you can apply for HCPC registration. If the verification is unsuccessful, the verifier will speak to your training manager to let them know why you're unsuccessful. And hopefully it might just be that they're just not satisfied with maybe one or two of your evidences, and they might give you some time to resubmit that. Or it might be that, during the tour there was quite a lot of gaps and you weren't able to answer questions. It might be a case of rearranging that verification again. Again, it varies. It just depends on what the reason is, but your verifier will have those conversations with the training manager. It's very rare that this happens. You shouldn't be put through for a verification unless you're absolutely ready. So that hopefully goes through kind of the formal processes of everything. I can't see in the chat if there are any questions, but I will have a look at that. And I'm now going to hand over to one of our current placement students, Yeni. You ready?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Good. Hi, everyone. I'm Yeni, and I'm currently coming to the end of my placement in clinical immunology. So I'm kind of just going to go through some things that I feel like might be helpful to you, or things that I wish I'd heard during this time last year. So just first of all, going into kind of how I prepared for placement. Lab-wise, I kind of made a note to kind of look into what was done in my lab. Different labs kind of specialise in different sectors and provide different services. So even though there might be same disciplines across different trusts, different trusts specialise in kind of different areas. And you don't have to know everything about your lab before you start, because of course you're going to learn whilst you're there. But it's a good way to kind of show interest to know beforehand. And a lot of you might already know from like your interviews, things like that, because I knew a lot of information from my interview, but it's nice to kind of jog your memory before you go and start your placement, just so you're not coming in and having no idea what's going on in the lab. And then also kind of personal preparation. A lot of the stuff Tahmina said, like having professional clothing, things like that. Because I know that I didn't have a lot of smart casual clothing before I started placement, so things like that to be wary of. Starting your first week, having a good night's sleep. You're getting a lot of information thrown at you in those first few weeks, so you kind of just want to make sure that you're as ready as possible. And when it comes to how placement has benefited me, there's just been numerous, countless benefits, and I could not praise it enough. Professional benefits, obviously, is having my portfolio completed. It's such a weight off your shoulders to know that once you graduate, you can apply for your HCPC registration. I don't think anything really tops that, to be honest. But then also just having the experience, making it so much easier to become employed after you graduate. And I think also having the experience kind of solidifies your career path, whether or not it's something you really want to go into. And also helps you decide kind of what disciplines you might be interested in. Because I know compared to when I first started and what I learned in uni compared to what I've actually seen practically, my opinions on different disciplines have kind of changed. So I really recommend it for that side. And then when it comes to personal benefits, I think the people and interpersonal skills that I've kind of developed have been really invaluable. It's just different compared to the skills you develop working in a team at uni as opposed to in the workplace. You kind of learn how to really get along with people that you wouldn't have really met outside of the workplace, how to compromise, things like that, how to kind of really make sure that everyone kind of feels okay in what they're doing, and how to help people when they're down, things like that. And I think it really mentally prepares you for the future as well. I think a lot of things that graduates, like one of the things graduates say they struggle with a lot is going straight from uni to like a 9-to-5 lifestyle or working shifts. It's quite a big jump. But I feel like a placement kind of really prepares you, just gives you a bit of a taste into what it will be like once you graduate. And then just some general advice. I think don't be afraid to say anything when you're confused, or ask questions when you don't know. Because I think something I struggled with at the beginning was feeling like I didn't want to seem as if I was just a silly student that didn't know what anything was. But it's really important to kind of ask questions, especially because you need to really build your foundations. Otherwise, you're just going to end up being even more confused later on. And I think also whoever's training you sees value in you asking questions. It shows that you're listening. It shows that you want to learn, and you're actually taking in the information you're saying. And outside of the lab, I think it's really important to kind of involve yourself in lab activities if you're someone who wants to feel kind of included, because I think it can be kind of isolating being a student sometimes. For me, I was the only student in my laboratory, so it was kind of easy to kind of feel separate from the rest of the team at times. So something that I found really helpful was kind of involving myself in when they had lab activities, when people would go for meals, people's leaving dues, things like that. It's just nice to kind of involve yourself. And then last thing I want to say is just to make sure that just because you're a student doesn't mean that your voice doesn't really matter. It's easy to kind of feel like you're a student, that you should just feel lucky to be there, that when you have something to say, you should kind of hold it in. Your opinion matters just as much as anything else. And when you feel you're not happy with something, whether that's not feeling supported by a training officer or not having your portfolio time, things like that, it's really important to voice your concerns, because you shouldn't just feel like you should just be happy to be there. It's okay to have issues or concerns, things to address. So that's mainly it from me, unless there's questions or if we're waiting to the end.
Thank you, Yenny. I think, go on, Sue.
No, I was just going to say there's one in the chat, but it's general. So yeah, I think if we move on and then do it at the end, that'll be great.
Yeah.
Okay, that's perfect.
Over to you, Joy.
Hello, my name is Joy, and I'm a student trainee biomedical scientist. My disciplines are hematology and blood transfusion. So there are a few things that I did to prepare for my placement. So firstly, in the summer break, I worked through the online mandatory training or statutory training. And in my trust, there are a variety of topics from fire and safety, normal health and safety, information governance, equality, diversity, and inclusion. And I believe it was really helpful to work through all of this before I started my placement, because it gave me more time to adjust to working full time. And also, these are quite useful to use as portfolio evidence to annotate it. Secondly, I asked my placement provider what they thought was useful for me to know before I started, and I worked through what they'd given me. So in my case, they recommended that I look through the list of tests they'd sent me that they run and the analyzers that they use as well. And I used a website called Lab Test Online UK just to learn more about the test and the associated disorders, and it really gave me like a wider understanding about like what we do in the laboratory. So that was quite useful, because when you come in, everything is so unfamiliar. However, it really makes you feel more comfortable to be able to see words that you've become familiar with as you've been doing your reading. Now for some advice that I would give to future placement students. So firstly, there are some tasks you can complete before you start. So I recommend getting those out of the way so that you have more free time when your placement does start. For example, I'd recommend completing your online mandatory training, because it can be quite time consuming. In my case, there are quite a few modules, and it also requires like an assessment at the end as well. So it's just really good to get that done when you have lots of time in the summer. If it's not giving you this information already, I would also recommend asking your placement provider what tests they run and the analyzers they use. Then you can use a reputable source just to read up more about it. And I'd also recommend that you just go further and explore the things you become curious about as you read. Another thing that I would recommend is just asking your placement provider how you can succeed in this placement, because they're very willing to give information on things like that, and it also shows your enthusiasm as well. So when I'm being trained, I use like a small A6 size notebook that can fit into your lab coat pocket, and I just use it to take notes as I'm being trained. And I felt that it was quite useful in helping me to memorize the procedure, because you do have an SOP. Making your own notes really helps you to understand it better in my case. Also, when you're being trained, you probably have a lot of questions, and like Yenny said, I would also recommend like don't be afraid to ask questions, because you don't want to learn the procedure like in a a wrong way or do it incorrectly if you can. So it's just best to ask your questions whilst you're being trained. And it's also good to note down the questions that you can research further yourself at home. Concerning your portfolio, you can also talk to other biomedical scientists other than your training officer, because your colleagues have also all completed the portfolio. So they have wealth of knowledge, and some of them might even be newly qualified. So they've just done their portfolio recently. They can help you, they can give you ideas for evidence, and they can even possibly read over your work as well. So it's really nice to have a good relationship with your colleagues. So doing a placement has definitely impacted my professional development and career progression. Of course, the main thing is being able to be registered right after university. That's going to make an amazing difference, and I'm really grateful for that. And alongside those skills related to medical procedures, I've also developed more soft and transferable skills. For example, I use my communication skills daily, both verbal and written. I do this by discussing with colleagues, asking questions, by speaking with service users on the phone, by signing my initial on the road so I can tell other colleagues that I've done this task and they need to do it. So I communicate a lot in daily life. I've also really strengthened my teamwork skills by working with my colleagues to provide a better service to service users. So I've really learned how to get along with different people and maintain a good professional relationship. My leadership skills have also been developed through working via remote supervision. So I have experience handling the coagulation section and the HbA1c area alone. And the notebook that I mentioned earlier, it really comes in handy here because as you're being trained, you encounter certain problems and issues, and you also find out the solution. So it's really useful to be able to have written down the solution so you can remember it for next time, because you do forget some things as you're being trained because you have so much information being thrown at you. Doing a placement has definitely impacted my time management skills. I feel like they've definitely improved. So at the start of my placement, I found it quite difficult balancing a full-time job, portfolio work, and university assignments. So as a result, I decided to research some organizational techniques that I can use, and I found what is effective for me. So that process has taught me a lot, and I've also learned a lot about having a work-life balance, having hobbies, and doing things outside of work as well. So yeah, I think that's what I've got to say. Best of luck in your upcoming placements. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Joy. I'll quickly move on to Yamen and then Saira, and then we can start looking at the questions. Over to you, Yamen.
Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me and see me?
Yeah.
So my name is Yamen, and I'm a trainee biomedical scientist in a biochemistry discipline. First thing I would like to say that placement opportunity is really something like a treasure. So chase it up, even though if you failed it for the first time, keep chasing it up, because honestly, it's such an amazing opportunity that you learn a lot. So let's start with the placement preparation. So what did I do to start before starting my placement? I make a bit of research about the hospital that I'm gonna doing my placement at, knowing who I will be working with, searching on LinkedIn on my training officer name, kind of being a spy and see how about to know more about them and what they are specialists at. That will really help you in having professional relationships with them and being confident in during your placement. Also, please don't forget your notebook. That's always keep it with you, and a pen. This always your key to learn. Every note, every idea they are sharing with you, try to write it up, look it up later. You might not have the chance to read it at the same minute that they're telling you about, but later on the day, if you back to your home or whenever you have a chance, just read about it, and you will really enjoy reading it, because you're kind of solving a puzzle. Oh, that's what I've been told before. That's what my teacher had said that before. So this connections really, like, it will make you happy, to be honest. Also, one of the preparations that I did, I tried to be familiar with the colors of the tubes. I don't know if it's clear. Oh my God. So like being familiar with the colors of each tube, what do they do? What test of each tube that your discipline gonna, so like hematology, they do with the red colored tubes and some of them blue. So it just depends on what discipline you're gonna go to. Look up on the colors of the test that they do. In terms of expectations, so what is expected from you? Same what being previously mentioned by my colleague Tahmina, that attending every day, being there, show your engagement, just show that passion, show that you are there always. That will be enough, to be honest. And also, show your interest, show that you are willing to learn, willing to know more, willing to gather that knowledge, not just sitting there and watching people. No, actually ask questions, because you are like having this placement here for a reason. In terms of the skills that I gained, there is plenty of them, and like problem solving, and becoming more confident about each test, what each test does to the why we're doing it, what the science behind of each test, also being independent, you just become confident during your procedures. And I really can't wait to back for final year to share all this experience with my colleagues, and just see myself, like, the amount of experience that I've gathered during this placement. Types of evidence that should be provided. I think you guys all be aware of it. These types of evidence are reflections, personal statements, and since now it's electronic, there are a lot of creative ideas that you can present your evidence. So it can be infographic, poster, it can be a video if you like. Just be creative, think out of the box to show up how you are competent in doing certain task. And here, as you can see me on my two pictures. So the first picture, I'm doing an osmolality test, and on the second picture is I've highlighted that I was doing calibrations. So calibration also is a part of a task that you will be learning to do, and aliquot and pipetting, and learn all that stuff from scratch. My final advice to you is, remember, this is a journey. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to do things wrong. But just remember, every failure is a chance to learn. So take advantage of this placement. Gather as much as you can of experience. Ask questions whenever you can. Never say, like, don't be shy. Always ask questions for your colleagues and seniors if you need to be rotated or visit another department or discipline. And yeah, that's it. If you guys want to ask me any questions, I'm more than happy to answer on my social media stuff, LinkedIn account, and my email of the university, and Twitter. I still like it to call it Twitter. And now I'll pass it on to my colleague, Saira. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yamen. So I am aware that we are slightly over time. I'm hoping you will still hang on for Saira to talk and share her experience, and then we could spend maybe 5 minutes at the end just answering the questions in the chat. So do bear with us. But if, of course, you have to leave, we understand. This is being recorded, so you might want to catch up and just watch the last few minutes of the session. So over to you, Saira.
Hi guys, I'm a student trainee at MFT in haematology. And I want to start off by emphasising what my colleagues have all said. You are much more supported as a student on placement than you would be if you had to take an MLA position after university. That's because you've got the added support from university and you're here on placement, and they've got all the time to train you. The biggest pro for me was I'm in a really big training hospital, which is quite common in a lot of the placements. So they see students come in every year. They see new people come in. So everyone's constantly training. You'll see everyone around you has either been in a position where they've started from a student or an MLA. Everyone's had to train to where they are. That's why everyone is respected so equally here. And they know that the anxiousness, the nervousness. For a lot of people who are coming on placement, it will be your first jobs because you're only students. So it'll be your first job, and I was really nervous when I started. So the nerves and the sort of reservations that you might be having about leaving university to come into the workplace, it's completely normal. And all of us have had it, but you have to remember you're going into a setting where people are constantly learning. They're constantly being trained on new things, new systems, and you're really supported on placement, especially because you're one of the youngest here and they do really look after you. It's such, I'd say like a family setup where they look out for the students a lot if you show your willingness and your passion for learning. As well as that, I wanted to say, keep an eye out for all the IBMS content because it will really support you on your placement, as well as applying for placements. We do, the IBMS do interview preparation, CV writing workshops and stuff, so that'll be of great value to you guys. My main point that I want to say is you will see yourself develop immensely with your character building. But in the 9 months that I've been here, I've gone from a position of being when I first came in, one of the seniors said to me, "You look like a deer in headlights when you came in," because for me it was such a big lab and I was so shocked. And now I'm at a position where I'm able to train and support the new MLAs that have come in. One of the main SOPs that the new SOPs that have been issued this past term is leadership skills. So a biomedical scientist should be aware of their own leadership skills. And one for me is managing my workload, as well as being able to now go from someone who was trained to someone who's competent and confident enough to train new people. And for me, that was a massive achievement personally for myself. So yeah, that I couldn't have done any of that without the training and the support I've had here from everyone, from MLAs to BMSs to seniors. And that is because I came in as a student and I showed that I was willing to learn, and that is the main thing that they look for. If someone's willing to learn and they've got good etiquette and stuff, they will put the time in and invest in you because ideally they want to retain the placement students. So yeah, and I was able to, the second picture is actually a careers fair. So I was able to talk to other younger school children, and I didn't notice, but at the time, it was all the different disciplines in the NHS. So we had paramedics, doctors, and we got to communicate. It was like we got to communicate and understand how our role is so important, but also raise awareness. Our role as biomedical science is very behind the doors. It's not really known to the public, but when you're actually in the field, you understand how important it is and how you should be proud to come in and be a trainee biomedical scientist because your job is really, really, really valued. So yeah, best advice for everyone is keep an eye on the IBMS Support Hubs and be curious, keep asking questions. No question's a silly question. It's guaranteed been asked before. And be curious and keep on learning. That's all.
Thank you, Saira. That leads me on very nicely to the next bit. So Saira has done a really good job in promoting the IBMS Support Hubs. Thank you, Saira. But there's a lot more out there outside of the Support Hubs as well. Lots of CPD opportunities. So if you do want to become a member of the IBMS, for students, it is only £12 a year. You get access to lots of resources, newsletters, online webinars, such as today's one. So yeah, if you take advantage and use all of the resources that have been provided to you, that will also help your career progression and just help you in general, for whether it's for preparing for placements, but even after you graduate, there's different levels of membership. So depending on the membership that you have after you're a student, the resources are tailored to the level that you're at and that you're working at that point. There's also post-registration qualifications. So it doesn't just stop after you've done your portfolio and you become registered as a biomedical scientist. There's lots of other qualifications that come after you become registered. And again, that helps you with your career progression, so getting promoted, whether you want to stay on and continue working as a biomedical scientist, but there's other routes as well, going into clinical scientists, consultants. So do have a look. So I am aware that we are over time, so happy to take questions now. And I will stop sharing. see Sue's been keeping an eye on the chat.
Yeah, I have, Tahmina. There's some in the question and answer bit as well, so I'm just going through a couple there, but they do overlap with what's in the chat. So I've tried to answer as we've gone along. Lots and lots of different questions about advice and some specific questions, but I think I have answered them. One of the questions that we said we'd hold until the end, because it was for the placement students, was what kind of preparatory work did they do? Did they have any work experience? Did they do any volunteering or anything before they went on placement? And I said it might be useful if everybody talked about that, because they will have individual experience, but some of you did that in your presentations anyway. But would you like to just come back in, placement students, and just say what you did to get ready?
Yeah.
Do you want to go,
I
Yamen?
can jump in and say, so to be honest, my skills that I've written on my CV that I gathered from my university, it was more than enough to show my passion for the placement position and the trainee position. However, I want to be clear and honest that I came from a restaurant point of view. So I used to work in a restaurant, and obviously there is a transferable skills that I also discussed on my CV about the time management, how I made a clear communication all the time with my colleagues, and how all this service, like working under pressure and paying attention to details, all that kind of stuff, all of that, link it in your CV and speak about it. And that's how you're going to benefit yourself and convince the person who viewing your CV about you are really competent for this position and you are ready for this position.
Thanks, Yamen. If anybody else wants to chip in, I'll just add something at this point which might be useful if anyone missed it in the chat. We did do support hubs on CV writing and interviews, getting ready for interviews, and I've posted a link to that in the chat if anybody wants to go back and find those. One of the things students forget to do sometimes is talk about what you learned during your degree. So it's great you had some work experience, Yamen, and you talked about, I can deal with people and I've got time management skills and that kind of thing. But people forget to say, I've done practical classes and these are the skills that I've already learned and these are things that I know. So don't overstate it and say, I'm brilliant at everything that I've ever been taught in the lab, but don't forget to put some of those competencies and practical skills that you've already got onto your CV as well, because sometimes people forget that. Saira, did you want to add anything? You've left your camera on, so I just wanted to know you're happy with that. Fab. Joy, did you want to come back in? No, you're happy?
I'm also of the same opinion that you can mention different transferable skills. In my CV, I also did mention like the skills I'd gained in the lab, such as like micropipetting and things like that. So that's good to mention.
Yeah, it is. Anything that you've got that's a technical or practical skill, so data analysis, data interpretation, things that you do when you're at university, alongside transferable skills. So even if you haven't had a part-time job, you will be working in groups with other students, you will have time management skills, you will be doing all of those things as part of being a student. So don't forget to add those things in and applying it to a lab context, why that would make you good for the job. There's a couple of things that have come in at the end that I thought would be useful to ask you all as well. So it's Britannia has asked, how stressful was it with time management? They know that the labs are very busy, so that transition from being a student to managing your time in the lab, it is busy. You do have a lot to do. So have you got any words of advice for if people feel a bit overwhelmed, or how you made that transition?
I'll start.
There's a bit of echoing. Yeah.
As a student, you're quite supernumerary, so you're not expected to be on one position on your own. For your first, so hours are in blocks, so I have 3 sections and 12 weeks of each section for training. And for the first month, you're always paired with someone until you're signed off competent. When you sign off competent, you are more capable of doing it on your own if you are willing to. So if you're uncomfortable and you're working with a task that you don't think you can manage, you have no responsibility to take that alone. You are being trained just as a student and you're protected. So if you need support, everyone will be around to support you. The chiefs and seniors are well aware that you are not as used to the busy lab that a lot of your colleagues will be, and they're aware of that, and they're not going to put you in a task where you feel like you'll be overwhelmed. They hate to make you a confident BMS, but you have to remember we've still got a year of our degree left. That will come with time. Things like that come with time. And to add to that, you're given breaks just like everyone else and stuff. But again, if you're given a task that you feel overwhelmed with, you're able to just walk away and someone else will carry it on, or you hand it over to somebody else, because you're not expected to manage something that's like an emergency or an urgent on your own, because you are still a student. You're not MLA or something.
Thanks, Saira. So I think that's really important, isn't it? That you do have backup. You're not just going to be thrown in at the deep end and be expected to sink or swim. Is that your experience as well, Yamen?
Can I also add one thing to Saira, is also do not forget that your whole purpose of being in the placement is completing your portfolio. Like, please don't forget till the last minute that to write your evidence and your modules and gathering evidence. You may be in a position that first 6 months you will be gathering all, like, pictures from different departments and different sections in the hospital, and then the training officer will allow you to maybe have more time than more than a study leave day to write them up. So always prioritize that your whole purpose for being in the placement is to finish your portfolio. I've heard a lot of stories. Some people, they haven't finished it until like July. So don't be in that position, and try to finish it as you go along, and set yourself a plan.
Thank you, Yamen. Saira, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. You're allocated study time, and some different trusts do it differently, but for us it's half a day allocated study time where you're expected just to work on your portfolio. So within your hours on Monday to Friday, you get half a day off to just work on your portfolio. As well as that, with your mentor, as well as the university meetings that we have, you're on a training plan and a track. So you'll have meetings with your mentor every month, and you'll be set deadlines for your portfolio for what you need to complete by the month going forward. And then when you have your bigger meeting with the university tutor, she will monitor that you're completing your portfolio as you should be throughout the year. So yeah, throughout the year. So yeah, your portfolio is supported. They are aware that it is a big piece of work for someone who's never been around it, but never done it before. We was quite lucky because we had the portfolio club at Salford, so we was used to it, but some students have seen it first time. So yeah, you are allocated study time, and they're well aware. As well as that, there's some adjustments in place as well. So 9 to 5 is a general hours for us here, but there's another student that does 8 to 4. So if there's situations like that, it's just a conversation between your university and your management, and they can put a reasonable adjustment in place.
Thank you, Saira.
Just to add, sorry, Sue, just to add to what Saira was saying as well, I think, and I saw something in the chat in terms of how to prepare. Saira mentioned that obviously we have the portfolio club at Salford, and some students haven't yet seen what the portfolio looks like. It is worth, before starting the placement, just going on the IBMS website and having a look at the resources provided for the portfolio. Just familiarise yourself with the modules, look at the standards of proficiency, look at what's required, and check if you've done anything at university that you already have knowledge on. So if you've covered things on EDI, for example, or even performing standard investigation of the test that you've done in some of your clinical specialism modules, you can start preparing some evidence before you've even started your placement.
Yeah, thanks, Tahmina. Someone asked, and I did put the link to the Reg Portfolio guidance, the page that has guidance in for candidates, and I said exactly the same thing. You can look at it and know what it is, so you know what you're expecting before you go, so you're not surprised by anything. I've got quite a few more questions to go. I am aware we've quarter of an hour over, but we'll keep going, because if we answer the questions, then it means that people who watch the video back can get the answers as well. So Kiana has asked about how long it takes to get HCPC registration. Again, I've popped a link in the chat and said it depends on the route that you're doing. So if you do a placement year and you finish your portfolio and you have your verification and you're successful, and you then finish your degree, you can send that information to the institute and we will issue a certificate of competence within a few weeks, and then you can get onto the register. That's the quickest way to do it. If you haven't done a placement year, you would then need to do the training after you've done your degree, and it's not until you have both bits that you can become registered. If you've not done an IBMS accredited degree and you're studying in the UK, you would need to apply for a degree assessment. Again, people have asked about that, and I've put links in the chat. And we would identify for you what you've not done yet. You would need to do top-up modules at an accredited degree, as well as find a position to do your training portfolio. So that will take longer. So it depends on which route you're doing. But the quickest way is to do the placement, and you should be within a few weeks of graduation that you can get onto the register if that's what you've done. And then the next question is about later qualifications. There is lots of information on the IBMS website, and I'll pop a link in the chat to that when we finish so that I can add more in. We do qualifications right up to consultant level, biomedical scientist, so there's lots of support and help for people once they are on the register. Richard has asked, are there any formulas or calculations you can recommend to memorise? No, you don't need to memorise anything. People aren't expecting you to be able to regurgitate information. They're expecting you to listen and to learn while you're on placement. So they will help you and explain reference ranges to you and information that you need to look at once you're on placement. So there's no preparation work as in revising to do. It's all of the things that the students have mentioned about being ready, being keen, being enthusiastic, thinking about linking what you've already learned in your degree to get into the placement. It's not about learning numbers and formulas. Brittonette has asked, how quickly and easy is it to complete the portfolio? It's not about being quick, it's about doing it properly. So the quickest anybody really does it is about 6 months. So if you think the students have all been saying they get half a day to work just on the portfolio, but the rest of the time they're gathering bits of evidence and they're working through competency so that they can then put those evidence pieces together. We're not looking for people to get through it in a month because it won't be good enough. What you need to do in the portfolio is demonstrate your proficiency and your competency and how you can meet those standards of proficiency. And you can't do that without having experience. So we expect people to take 6 to 9 months if they're focusing just on that. If they are studying as well as doing the portfolio, then it might take them a bit longer. Most people have up to 3 years. We ask for pieces of evidence to be within 3 years of the issue of the portfolio. So I would say on average, it takes around a year. Placement students tend to do it a little bit quicker because they need to get back to uni. So you tend to finish it in 6 to 9 months. But if it's a person who's working in practice, it's usually a year or so. And then Dear has asked what type of evidence. I've answered that in the link to look at the candidate guidance, because that tells you there's a mandatory piece for each of the modules in the portfolio. That's what we tell you you have to do, but the others are choices. So Yamen talked about different types of things. He's done videos, posters. You can be quite creative, and you can talk through with your training officer. Is that appropriate? Is it showing that I'm demonstrating the standards of proficiency? What is it that would be good for this particular module? And they'll be able to guide you with that. And then the recording, yeah, I've answered that a couple of times. The recordings are also made available within a few days once the comms team have topped and tailed them and taken off the chatty bits at the beginning. So that will be on the website, and they're always open access. They're always available. So you can look back on it whenever you want to. And then at the end, Henry's asked, can I run both portfolio and top-up modules in the same time? Yes, you can. Yes, you can, Henry. Quite often people do that, especially if you already have a job. So if you're working in the NHS already and you think you want to become registered and your workplace can support you to do that, you should ask for your degree to be assessed, and we can look at a BSc and a Master's together if you have both, or just the BSc that you've done, and identify how many top-up modules you would need to do. Most people do them at the same time because, again, that's the most time-efficient way to do it. So you could be studying top-up modules at an accredited degree at the same time as starting the portfolio, but you can't get the certificate of competence and register until you finish both of those bits. So I think, are there any other questions after that, Tahmina? That's all I can see.
Yeah, I don't think there are any more new questions after that one.
Have we missed any? I don't think we have. I've tried to put links into the chat as we've gone along. I'll follow up with that one around the qualifications post-registration, because we do have lots. So I'll pop a link into the chat at the end on that. Is there anything else that you wanted to say to me, or your fantastic students would like to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you really to the students for being here today and for sharing their experiences. I think it's really nice to be able to listen from current placement students, because you just have more of a connection. I think students can relate to you more, and because you're actually you know, in the placement at the moment, you've been able to share what you did beforehand, what you're doing now, and how it's going to help you in your final year. So a real big thank you.
Don't forget, Tahmina, you are a part of this journey. You're a part of this success. So thank you so much for you, actually. Maybe without your support, we are not here.
No, I'm sure you will be. You guys did all the hard work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, so I've just popped a link in. Someone's asked about degree assessments following the answer that I just gave. So I've popped that in. I'll do the advanced qualifications as well before I log off. So thank you again, everyone who's joined us. I can see numbers have dropped down over the time because we have gone a little bit over, but so much to tell you and so much experience to share. So we've taken a little bit longer than an hour today. So we'll formally end here. We'll stop the recording and we'll say thank you again for joining us. And the video will be made available. And if you've got any further questions, you can email into the Institute and we can answer those, or we can pass them on to the students if you want them to answer for you. So thank you for joining us. Tahmina, if you'd like to stop the recording, we'll leave it there and people can leave and go on to the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for doing such a good job. Nice to see you all.